Hello, this is Christina Huggins,
And I'm Cindy Schwaneveld.
and we'll be discussing our landscape ecology final project, which we did at Virgil Phillips Farm over the future management towards the wetland area.
All right, to get into our study area, we of course is located in Moscow, Idaho. It is 5 miles off the US Highway 95, and it has a total of 160 acres of farm property. And on the left here, you can see we have created a plot map of the wetland that we will be observing today in our area.
Virgil Phillips Farm's history goes back extensively, and records suggest farming on the land occurred prior to 1917. History of the wetland itself was mentioned by Paul Marcy, the occupant of the area from 1917 to 1923, as being a marsh in the northwestern region of the landscape. The land is named after Virgil Edemus Phillips, who occupied the land from 1944 to 1972, and then entrusted the land to the city of Moscow. Once under city ownership, it was then leased until 1990 and continued to undergo farming practices. Now the property is managed by the Latah County Department of Parks and Recreation. Many of the remaining historic buildings located in the park are located in the wetland area. It is likely that the land was used for a focus on hay production or for pasture land. The introduction of the reed canary grass occurred with the intent of using it as a breaking and crop when the land was used for agriculture and had persisted since.
So what are we facing in the wetland issue? Well, of course, like Sage said, it's called the reed canary grass. It's an invasive species that often chooses to inhabit wetlands, grasslands, stream margins, and ditches. The grass visually is distinguished by its flat-tempered hairless blades that are rough on both sides. During the springtime, when the plant growing season begins in the spring, the seeding process is incredibly tenacious and occurs rapidly. The reed canary is a cool season perennial that holds a thick root system and extensive seed bank, which leads to its abundance. Its ability to shade out competition is a huge contributor to its success in pushing out native species and occupying an entire region, depleting the ecological integrity of a wetland. This is a big concern because the reed canary grass holds little to no benefits for the region. It does not provide an adequate habitat and does not positively affect bank stability. The Homonish striving species alters hydrology by constricting waterways and traps silt particles. Specific to the carbon cycle of the wetland, reed canary grass reduces the amount of carbon stored in the wetland, which negatively affects any biodiversity of the area and their availability to the photosynthesizing. The rapid growth of the species marks it a huge threat to the wetland ecosystem and containing a heterogeneous landscape. Directly after germination, the plant grows vertically and can reach height near 6 feet in numerous cases. So for this specific site, the Virgil Phillips Farms, the RCG does hit roughly the 6-foot mark, but has been heavily compacted from winter snowfall. The ideal setting for reed canary grass is in wetlands near waterways containing water with a pH of 6 and below. In other words, it prefers more acidic water. And the reed canary grass colonal expansion is increased by light and height amount of available nutrients.
Our project is to look at the current state of reed canary grass in the Virgil Phillips Farm Park and to digitalize it along with making the current stream that runs through the park in order to meet the conservation/management project at a local scale requirement. This will be beneficial in providing a visual of the park and the expansion that RCG, or reed canary grass, has taken in the wetland specifically. This will be a baseline for management of the region and a great reference for future treatment attempts to come. We expect the results to be a sufficient resource for future comparison and to introduce the most beneficial management plan route for the site based off of unique variables the site provides.
All right, so let's begin with the methods. So we had to assess the information that was gathered for the wetlands in ArcGIS. And with that, we had to consider how they were evolving over time and what we had to determine its elevation. So to do this, we used a DEM raster format that's supported by the Virgil Phillips Farm Data Collection to generate an elevation class map in vector format. With this information, we were able to create a wetland area and the variation that formed into the area. And with that, we divided our elevation class into 5 classes. Given that, we had to make a polygon element to reflect the wetland itself and how it is affected over these specific elevations. And with that, we had to create a line function to construct the boundary region for the wetlands to see in the area and how it influenced by elevation changes. So visual representation of the park for a baseline of the area to reference once management approaches have been conducted is necessary, and the in-depth representation of the Virgil Phillips Farms wetland region as far as elevation. The reed canary grass population's site reference, direction, key labeled components, and distance reference all add to the site location and the understanding, which you will see later on in the next slide.
We conducted some research on management styles of the area. The research was about wetland reed canary grass management, and we looked into results which ended in the following treatment options. First is burning. Burning is suggested to occur in late spring after reed canary grass has begun its expansion. Positive effects of burning are that it will successfully remove biomass and kill any seeds on the surface. It will deplete the nitrogen supply that the plant prefers and can force a resprouting effect, forcing dormant buds to replenish those combusted. Negative effects of burning are that it provides a steady light supply, regrowth will occur quickly after the burn, and the technique must be partnered with another. The second option would be flooding. Flooding is suggested to be used only if a steady water level of over 12 inches can be maintained. This course of action requires persistence and heavy monitoring but can result in preventing seed germination and stopping reed canary grass rhizomes from benefiting. Reed canary grass can have a high tolerance for flooding, and this means of management can be risky. Next is shading. Shading out the reed canary grass would require a plastic fabric to be laid over the area, not allowing the species to receive sunlight. Positive results from this implementation would be that the adult plants eventually would die along with the reed canary grass rhizomes in theory. Negative impacts are that it is non-selective, meaning all plants under the fabric will lose sunlight. Resurge once tarp removal occurs is possible, and this management course can alter soil composition and microorganisms. The last management option we have would be adding a chemical component. Herbicides could be used on numerous levels and extents for management of reed canary grass. Broad-spectrum herbicide, possibly glyphosate, will reduce grass height and depletes the rhizome reserve. Overall, the herbicide will stress reed canary grass and allow other plants a fighting chance. The use of grass species herbicide will suppress growth of grasses and allow native non-grass species a head start. An effective herbicide attempt occurred at Washington National Park with the herbicide Polaris, with an additional compound used as surfactant. Positive aspects to this herbicide are that it is not harmful to pollinators and was used safely near waterways. It's important to mention that all of these management plans have attached with them that they must be monitored and occur over multiple years. And this also means that it requires constant upkeep and reapplication. The photos on this slide were gathered from in the field at Virgil Phillips Farm. As you can see from the top 2 photos, I went to the top of the water stream and near the end of the water stream at the end of the wetland area, and the water depth ranged from about 2.5 to 3.5 inches. This just shows generally how much water is in the park in the month of April. The bottom image shows the dead reed-canary grass from last year's time that has been matted down, and it also shows the popping up new reed-canary grass that is roughly about over a foot in length right now. This just shows a general idea of what the park looks like at this time and where the reed-canary grass is in its succession. Working with the ArcGIS program and implementing the tools using drone data gathered by Chaz Jones resulted in the following layout of the park. The key gives insight to what is displayed in the image, as well as the direction and reference point for further understanding of the location and its reed-canary grass expansion. In the upper right corner, you can see an extent of where the park is located, referring to Moscow, the University of Idaho. In the legend, you as well can see the blue shaded area is the reed-canary grass population, and then this color display that comes throughout the entire image is showing elevation, with the lowest elevation being in the northwest area of the park, and this is part of the wetland. Right through the middle of the image as well is the stream that provides the water for the wetland area. Some challenges we had when making this image were, as you can see from various trees in the park, the elevation map shows a couple of weird spots that could challenge our data of the polygon and where exactly all the outline is. From this, you have gathered from us information in person and in the field from photos in the previous slide, as well as an overview of the area from the drone data provided in this outline.
And now leading into the conclusion. When looking at the control treatment options of all the approaches that need upkeep and numerous applications paired with monitoring on an annual basis, this specific location brings in some areas to consider. Most importantly being the area is open to public park and it will continue to have human interactions along with domestic animals and wildlife. The region has an extensive reed-canary grass population and is a larger project. And of course the weather as of current contains precipitation often in the form of snowfall melting. The wetlands are surrounded by slopes which will result in erosion into the area of study, as well as continuous water runoff as the season progresses. Finances are as well an area of concern when thinking of manpower, chemical costs, upkeep, and equipment. So with the three optional approaches, the second approach is a shading technique, like we said before, and could be used but would require removal of the plant, which would be extensive manual hours and monitoring. And this tactic is a multi-year suppression, and we suggest that removal of the plant followed by an herbicide could lead to the seed bank being hit by the herbicide and managed, but once again would require hours of labor. Given the current conditions of the wetland, this tactic could be beneficial in forcing the seed bank to be utilized this early in the season. The RCG is currently at lower heights and compacted together. With this attempt of combining the drowning and shading approaches, this could be beneficial given the site's conditions. The hardest aspect could be maintaining water levels of at least 12 inches, and of course removing the oxygen availability and sunlight exposure in this way could result in higher mortality rates of the RCG. So with that, we as well suggest an introduction of a variety of flora following up on the approach of ridding the region of the invasive RCG. The flora we suggest would be beneficial to be introduced are the American slouch grass, common camas, blister sage, and soft rush, and finally the Bailey western inflated sage. So of course with these approaches and many challenges. It takes many considerations when it comes to future management, and of course, and above all, this experience and doing this project with the lessons we have learned throughout the semester and trying to figure out this real life future management consideration. This was a good challenge and experience to see the possibilities we could do to benefit the wetlands in this specific area and use this in our everyday lives.